Pack your things. I want you out tonight.
All right. Why is his name on every file? Because he was holding everything together. The system is doing exactly what it was designed to do. Yeah. By morning, they'll ask who you really are.
Russell Hughes was 41, a quiet facilities manager at Hamilton and Rhodes LLP in downtown Chicago. To everyone gathered for his 10th wedding anniversary, he looked like an ordinary husband, living in the shadow of his successful wife, Lydia. He drove an aging Ford Explorer, packed his own lunches, and never spoke about work. What they didn't know was that Russell carried responsibilities protected by strict confidentiality responsibilities that quietly touched fortunes far beyond his modest title. Then Lydia looked him in the eyes, pointed toward the front door, and told him to get out of the house as every member of her family watched in silence. If this story finds you tonight, let me know where you're watching from and what your local time is. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel around the world. And if you enjoy slow burn stories where truth wins over appearances, consider subscribing so you won't miss tomorrow's story. The hotel lobby was nearly empty when Russell Hughes stepped through the revolving doors just after 9:30 that evening. Outside, a cool October breeze swept across Michigan Avenue, carrying the faint sound of traffic and the glow of Chicago's skyline reflected against the Chicago River. Inside, soft jazz floated through polished marble floors, while a young receptionist welcomed him with the practiced smile reserved for business travelers. Russell requested a standard room, not a suite, not an upgrade. Just one night. He paid with the same rewards card he had carried for years, thanked the receptionist, accepted a single room key, and rode the elevator to the 12th floor without looking back. Anyone watching him would have assumed he had simply argued with his wife. They would have been wrong. Russell placed his overnight bag on the luggage rack before slowly removing his wedding ring. He stared at the thin gold band for several seconds, turning it between his fingers beneath the bedside lamp. The skin underneath remained pale after 10 years. He set the ring beside his wallet instead of putting it away. Nothing in the room reflected anger. No pacing, no shouting, no broken furniture. Only silence. That silence had followed Russell through most of his adult life. He had learned years earlier that speaking less allowed him to hear much more than everyone else. The narrator could see what nobody around Russell ever noticed. His calmness wasn't emptiness, it was discipline. Russell walked toward the window overlooking downtown Chicago. Hundreds of office towers stood illuminated against the night sky. Somewhere beyond them sat Hamilton and Rhodes LLP, one of the city's oldest corporate law firms. Tomorrow morning, employees would begin arriving before sunrise. Russell already knew his schedule. He also knew tomorrow would not unfold the way the Bennett family expected. His phone vibrated. Not Lydia, an automated reminder. He dismissed it before opening his laptop. Instead of browsing social media or watching television, Russell reviewed tomorrow's calendar. Several appointments appeared without descriptions, only internal reference numbers that meant nothing to anyone outside the firm. He closed the computer. Work could wait until morning. His thoughts drifted backward instead. 11 years earlier, he had first met Lydia Bennett at a neighborhood fundraiser in Naperville. Russell had volunteered to help organize parking for the event while Lydia worked alongside a real estate agency sponsoring one of the charity auctions. She had laughed easily. She admired confidence. Russell admired kindness. At least he believed kindness was what he saw. They married less than a year later. During those first months, life seemed uncomplicated. Their first apartment overlooked a small public park. They shared grocery lists, painted walls together, argued about furniture, dreamed about taking road trips across the Midwest. Money had never impressed Russell. Stability had. When Lydia's real estate career accelerated, Russell celebrated every success as though it were his own. He never competed with her, never compared salaries, never cared which name appeared on larger commission checks. Unfortunately, not everyone shared that perspective. Harold Bennett certainly didn't. Lydia's father had spent nearly 40 years building Bennett Development Group into one of Northern Illinois' most respected commercial real estate companies. Luxury apartment complexes, office parks, retail centers, industrial properties. His reputation carried weight throughout Chicago's business community. He valued ambition, visibility, status. Russell possessed none of those qualities on the surface. At least that was Harold's conclusion. During family dinners, Harold often asked Brandon Bennett, his son, detailed questions about acquisitions, investment returns, zoning approvals, and expansion plans. When conversation reached Russell, the questions changed. Still managing buildings? Everything running smoothly? Any clogged pipes this week? Everyone laughed. Russell smiled politely. He answered honestly every time. What one? Everything's running well. The conversation always moved on. Susan Bennett, Lydia's mother, preferred quieter insults. She never criticized Russell directly. Instead, she praised Lydia's achievements in ways that made Russell sound insignificant. Lydia has always been the ambitious one. I'm glad she takes care of everything. Some people simply aren't driven by success. Russell never corrected her. Emily Bennett, Brandon's wife, followed the family's lead. She occasionally asked Russell whether he planned to pursue something bigger, as though his career were unfinished, as though his life lacked purpose. Lydia rarely defended him. At first, Russell believed she simply wanted to avoid conflict. Over time, he noticed something changing. She had stopped correcting people's assumptions. Then she quietly began agreeing with them. Whenever someone joked that Russell must be lucky to have married such a successful woman, Lydia smiled. She never said otherwise. Eventually, even she started believing the story everyone repeated. That Russell contributed very little. That his modest salary barely mattered. That without her, he would struggle. The truth remained carefully hidden behind confidentiality agreements, locked offices, and responsibilities Russell could never discuss. So he stayed silent. Silence was easier than violating professional obligations. Silence also protected his marriage, or so he believed. The narrator understood what Russell himself had begun accepting months before the anniversary dinner. Respect rarely disappears overnight. It fades quietly, one ignored conversation at a time, one joke left unanswered, one public embarrassment excused as harmless humor, one assumption accepted because correcting it feels exhausting. Russell unpacked a clean shirt for tomorrow morning. He ironed the sleeves carefully using the hotel iron, pressed each crease, hung the shirt beside the window. His movements remained methodical. Routine offered stability when emotions became unreliable. At 10:15, Lydia called. Her name appeared on the screen. Russell watched it ring until voicemail answered. 5 minutes later, she called again. Then another time. He didn't reject the calls. He simply allowed them to end naturally. A text message arrived. Can we talk? No accusation, no apology, only 4 words. Russell placed the phone face down. Across town, the Bennett family likely assumed he would cool off overnight. They expected him to return home after breakfast. Offer another apology for a disagreement he had never started. Resume pretending everything was normal. Russell no longer believed normal was worth preserving. He showered, changed into a gray t-shirt, and switched off every light except the desk lamp. The room settled into complete stillness. Midnight arrived. The city outside never truly slept. Police sirens echoed somewhere in the distance. An elevated train rumbled through the darkness. Wind brushed softly against the windows. Then his phone rang again. This number did not display a name, only a secure internal extension. Russell answered immediately. This is Russell. A calm male voice spoke without greeting. Has your residential status officially changed? Russell looked toward the wedding ring resting beside his wallet. His expression never changed. Yes. The caller paused for only a second. Understood. Nothing more. No explanations. No condolences. No questions about his marriage. The line disconnected. Russell slowly lowered the phone. He knew exactly what that conversation meant. Somewhere inside Hamilton and Rhodes LLP procedures that had existed for years had already begun moving exactly as written. Not because anyone wanted revenge, not because anyone wished harm upon the Bennett family, simply because certain systems never depended on emotions. They depended on facts. And one important fact had changed forever. Russell Hughes woke at exactly 5:30. He had not set an alarm. For nearly 15 years, his body had learned to rise before sunrise, whether he was at home in a hotel or traveling for work. Routine had become second nature long before anyone around him understood why. He dressed carefully in the freshly pressed blue shirt he had prepared the night before. Dark charcoal slacks, black leather shoes polished enough to reflect the soft light inside the room. His appearance remained simple. Nothing expensive, nothing designed to impress. Before leaving, he slipped his wedding ring into a small compartment inside his wallet, not because he wanted to forget it, because he wasn't ready to throw it away. The elevator carried him silently toward the lobby. Outside downtown Chicago was only beginning to wake. Coffee shops unlocked their doors. Delivery trucks occupied narrow loading zones. Office workers hurried toward commuter trains carrying insulated cups and laptop bags. Russell stopped at the same cafe he had visited every Tuesday for nearly 6 years. The young barista smiled the moment she saw him. The usual Mr. Hughes, "Please." Large black coffee, whole wheat bagel, nothing else. She handed him the receipt before adding, "You look tired today." Russell smiled politely. "Long evening?" She nodded. "No kidding." That was the end of the conversation. Russell appreciated places where people respected silence. At 6:45, Hamilton and Rhodes LLP stood quietly beneath the morning sky. The 36-story glass building overlooked the Chicago River, its mirrored exterior reflecting streaks of orange sunlight breaking across the skyline. Thousands of people walked past the building every week. Almost nobody noticed the man entering through the employee entrance carrying an ordinary leather briefcase. They certainly didn't realize how many critical systems depended upon him. The title on Russell's personnel file read Facilities Operations Manager. It sounded remarkably ordinary. The reality was anything but. Years earlier, Hamilton and Rhodes had undergone one of the largest internal restructurings in its history after several national law firms suffered devastating cyber attacks, natural disasters, and compliance failures. Managing partners across the country realized something uncomfortable. Modern law firms spent enormous amounts protecting digital information. Very few adequately protected everything else. Original contracts, signed corporate resolutions, emergency authorization documents, physical evidence, secure access systems, disaster recovery procedures, federal continuity requirements. Someone needed to oversee every physical safeguard connecting those systems together. Not an attorney, not an accountant, someone patient, organized, reliable, someone who understood that one forgotten key or one overlooked authorization could delay transactions worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Daniel Rhodes had selected Russell. Not because Russell asked, because Russell had quietly demonstrated those qualities for years. The promotion had come with almost no public recognition, no impressive title, no company-wide announcement. Instead, it came with security clearances, confidential certifications, and legal obligations few employees even knew existed. Russell accepted every responsibility without seeking attention. His office remained small. His name never appeared on promotional brochures. His salary was comfortable but never extravagant. People naturally underestimated him. That misconception became one of his greatest professional advantages. He crossed the lobby. A security officer looked up immediately. "Morning, Mr. Hughes." "Morning, Carl." The security gate unlocked before Russell even reached it, not because of favoritism, because his credentials carried one of the highest physical access levels inside the building. Carl watched Russell disappear toward a private elevator unavailable to most employees. He had long ago stopped wondering why. The restricted operations floor occupied part of the 7th level. No windows, no decorative artwork, only reinforced archive rooms, environmental monitoring systems, secure storage vaults, backup communication equipment, and carefully labeled access control panels. Russell unlocked 3 separate doors before reaching his office. Each required different credentials. Each automatically logged the exact time of entry. He placed his coffee on the desk, then checked overnight reports. Temperature stable, humidity normal, archive security intact, emergency generators operational, no unauthorized entries, no compliance alerts. Everything appeared routine, except one notification. Residential status, update, confirmed. Processing complete. Russell studied the message for only a moment before closing it. He already knew what it meant. The update had not been created because of his marriage. It existed because federal continuity policies required certain high-level personnel to report significant changes affecting emergency contact structures, legal residency records, and authorized recovery chains. The system did not judge divorces, it simply processed facts. His office phone rang. "Daniel would like to see you." "I'll be there." Managing partner Daniel Rhodes occupied one of the firm's largest corner offices overlooking the river. Unlike many executives, Daniel preferred simple furniture. Bookshelves filled one wall. Historical legal volumes occupied another. No unnecessary decorations. Russell knocked once. "Come in." Daniel Rhodes stood beside the window holding a folder already opened. He was 62, silver-haired, and known throughout Chicago's legal community for never raising his voice. He extended his hand. "I'm sorry about last night." Russell accepted the handshake. "Thank you." Neither man mentioned Lydia. Neither discussed emotions. Professional boundaries remained intact. Daniel gestured toward 2 chairs. "Please sit." Russell did. Daniel opened the folder. "The residential update completed at 12:12 this morning." Russell nodded. "I expected it would." Daniel adjusted his glasses. As required, the continuity system automatically reviewed every authorization connected to your emergency designation. Russell remained silent. Daniel continued. "Several external dependency notifications have already been issued." "Understood." "No manual action was taken." "I know." Daniel smiled faintly. "I suspected you would." The managing partner leaned back. "Some people are going to assume you're responsible. They're free to believe that." "Does it bother you?" Russell considered the question. "Not as much as it once would have." Daniel looked toward the skyline before speaking again. "You've protected clients this firm and more than a few outside organizations for over a decade." "I was doing my job." "You've also protected your marriage." Russell didn't answer. Daniel already knew the truth. Several years earlier, Daniel had invited Russell to dinner after another long compliance audit. During that conversation, Russell admitted only one personal concern: "I don't want confidential work becoming a problem at home." Daniel had respected that decision. Now he understood the cost. He slid another document across the desk. "Federal certification review remains active." Russell glanced at the heading. Everything appeared exactly as expected. No surprises, no accusations, no disciplinary action, only procedures. Daniel folded his hands. "I assume your personal address will remain temporary." "For now." "If that changes, notify Human Resources." "I will." A brief silence settled over the office. Finally, Daniel spoke again. "You know Harold Bennett's company appears on several client matters." Russell nodded once. "I do." "He doesn't know why." "No." "Will you tell him?" Russell answered almost immediately. "I'm not permitted to." Daniel smiled. Exactly. The confidentiality agreements Russell had signed years earlier extended well beyond ordinary employment contracts. They covered client identities, emergency structures, operational dependencies, access architecture, federal compliance coordination. Violating those agreements could end careers and expose clients to significant legal risk. Russell had never once crossed that line, not even for his own wife. Daniel closed the folder. One more thing. Russell looked up. Dapore. The first calls from outside organizations started arriving before 6 this morning. Russell wasn't surprised. They're asking questions. They're discovering changes. And Daniel's expression remained thoughtful. I told them exactly what regulations allow me to say. Nothing more. Nothing more. Russell stood. So today's going to be busy. Daniel let out a slow breath. I have a feeling today is going to be difficult. For us? Daniel shook his head. No. He looked directly at Russell. For several people who spent years believing quiet men have nothing important to say. Russell thanked him and walked towards the door. Before he reached it, Daniel spoke one final sentence. By the calm certainty in his voice, Russell understood that events already unfolding across Chicago could no longer be stopped. By this afternoon, Daniel said quietly, they're finally going to discover exactly how much depended on the man they never bothered to understand. At precisely 7:18 a.m., Harold Bennett walked into the executive conference room on the 22nd floor of Bennett Development Group. The floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked downtown Chicago, where the morning sun reflected off hundreds of glass buildings. Inside, a 12-foot walnut conference table had already been covered with closing folders, financing packets, architectural renderings, and schedules for 3 commercial projects worth nearly $200 million. Harold liked beginning major closing days early. He believed successful businessmen should always arrive before problems did. This morning, however, the problems had arrived first. His executive assistant entered carrying a tablet. Good morning, Mr. Bennett. Morning, Claire. She hesitated. There's a small issue with the Madison Square closing. Harold barely looked up. What kind of issue? The escrow release hasn't been authorized. It'll clear. So far it hasn't. Harold reached for his coffee. Call First National Commercial Bank. They've already been contacted. And they're waiting for compliance confirmation. Harold frowned. Compliance confirmation for what? They didn't specify. He leaned back. Fine, we'll handle it. Nothing about the delay seemed particularly unusual. Large commercial transactions occasionally encountered minor paperwork problems. Someone signed the wrong page. Someone uploaded the wrong file. Someone forgot an insurance certificate. Annoying, but routine. He turned toward Brandon Bennett, who had just entered carrying his laptop. Morning? Brandon loosened his tie. Morning? You ready? Absolutely. Brandon connected his computer to the conference room display. The schedule appeared. 3 property closings, 2 refinancing agreements, 1 major land acquisition. Everything had been carefully planned for weeks. Lydia entered a minute later. She wore a cream-colored business suit and carried 2 phones. Her expression looked tired. Susan Bennett noticed immediately. You didn't sleep. Not much? Harold glanced toward his daughter. Did Russell come home? Lydia avoided eye contact. No. Harold sighed. He'll cool off. I don't know. You were both emotional. Lydia forced a smile. He just needs time. The narrator understood something Lydia didn't. Russell had never left during an argument before, not once in 10 years. This time had been different. At 7:34 a.m., Brandon's phone rang. He answered confidently. Brandon Bennett. His expression changed almost immediately. What? Silence. I don't understand. Another pause. He looked toward Harold. They're saying the Oak Street financing hasn't been released. Harold frowned. What reason? Brandon listened. then slowly lowered the phone. They said authorization remains pending. Pending from whom? They wouldn't say. Harold stood. Give me the number. He dialed personally. After introducing himself, he listened carefully. I understand funds haven't been released. A polite voice answered from the other end. Correct, Mr. Bennett. Why? We're awaiting updated compliance verification. We've already submitted everything. Yes, sir. So release the funds. I'm afraid we cannot. Harold's voice became firmer. I've worked with your institution for 18 years. We understand. Then fix it. I'm sorry, sir. Our system prevents further processing until verification is complete. What verification? I'm not authorized to discuss internal compliance requirements. The call ended politely. Harold stared at his phone. That had never happened before. Across the room, Lydia checked another email, then another. More notifications continued arriving. Subject lines appeared one after another. Action required. Authorization pending. Transfer delayed. Documentation review. Compliance hold. Her heartbeat accelerated. This doesn't make sense. Susan walked beside her. What is it? I've got 4 separate transaction delays. All today? Every one of them. Brandon refreshed his inbox. A 5th notification appeared, then a 6th. His confident expression began fading. Harold picked up another phone. This time he called the law firm coordinating one of the commercial closings. David. The attorney answered immediately. Morning, Harold. My financing is frozen. I know. So, unfreeze it. I can't. What do you mean you can't? There are compliance issues. What issues? I'm still trying to determine that. Harold gripped the phone tighter. We're scheduled to close in less than 3 hours. I understand. So, what's missing? David hesitated. I'm waiting for confirmation from Hamilton and Rhodes. Harold blinked. Hamilton and Rhodes? Yes. What do they have to do with this? I'm not certain yet. The call ended without answers. By 8 o'clock, the atmosphere inside the conference room had completely changed. Nobody discussed market forecasts anymore. Nobody admired architectural drawings. Instead, everyone watched phones ringing almost continuously. Claire entered again. I'm sorry to interrupt. What now? Harold asked. The insurance carrier placed temporary holds on 2 certificates. Why? They're awaiting updated operational verification. Harold rubbed his forehead. Operational verification. That's what they told me. Brandon pushed his chair backward. This has to be a computer error. It has to be. Lydia nodded immediately. Exactly. She reached for her phone. I'm calling Russell. The phone rang. No answer. She called again. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. She typed quickly. Russell, please answer. Something strange is happening. No response. The narrator observed the first crack appearing beneath Lydia's confidence. She still believed Russell had nothing to do with the morning's chaos, but for the first time she wished he were standing beside her. He always remained calm when everyone else panicked. She had spent years overlooking that quality. Now she missed it. At 8:17 a.m., Brandon received another call. He placed it on speaker. A project manager spoke first. We've got contractors waiting. We're working on it. The title company won't release documentation. Did they explain why? They mentioned compliance authorization. Again, the same words. Compliance, authorization, verification. None of it sounded familiar. Harold looked toward Lydia. Does Russell ever deal with anything called compliance? She almost laughed. Russell manages facilities. Exactly. So no. The narrator knew she had answered honestly, because Lydia truly believed that was all her husband did. At Hamilton and Rhodes, meanwhile, Russell calmly reviewed archive requests arriving from multiple departments. His expression never changed. He approved routine internal transfers, verified environmental reports, answered staff questions. Not once did he check personal news. Not once did he ask about the Bennett family. His responsibility remained exactly what it had always been. Do the job. Nothing more. Back at Bennett Development Group, another attorney entered the conference room carrying several printed documents. Harold. What? I think we've identified something. What? The compliance requests. Harold stood immediately. Talk. They're all referencing the same operational chain. So, the chain originates from Hamilton and Rhodes. Harold frowned. I still don't understand. Neither do I. The attorney handed him several pages. Near the bottom appeared a reference code. Another, then another. Different projects, different dates, different transactions. Yet every page contained one identical line. Harold read it twice, then a third time. His eyes narrowed. He slowly looked toward Brandon. Come here. Brandon stepped beside him. What is it? Harold pointed at a name, printed neatly beside several authorization records. Brandon read silently. His expression stiffened. Lydia walked over. What? Harold didn't answer immediately. He simply handed her the papers. She looked down. Her breathing slowed, then stopped for a heartbeat. One name appeared repeatedly across document after document. Operational authorization, continuity certification, emergency access verification, compliance coordination. Every line carried exactly the same signature. Russell Hughes. The room became completely silent. Finally, Harold spoke the question no one in the family had ever imagined asking. Why? He looked around the conference table. Why? Is Russell's name on every compliance file we have? No one had an answer. Lydia stared at Russell's name for nearly 10 seconds before speaking. There has to be another Russell Hughes. Nobody answered. Harold continued studying the documents spread across the conference table. Each page carried a different project number, different clients, different dates. Yet the same name appeared repeatedly beside phrases that none of the Bennett family had ever paid attention to before. Continuity operations, emergency authorization, certified compliance oversight, operational verification. Harold slowly removed his reading glasses. I've never seen these before. The attorney standing beside him nodded. Most clients don't? Then why are they connected to us? Because Hamilton and Rhodes manages legal infrastructure for several of your commercial transactions. Harold looked up. We hired attorneys. You did? So why would a facilities manager appear on legal documents? The attorney hesitated. I'm trying to determine that. Across the table, Brandon searched Russell's name through every internal project folder stored on the company's secure server. More results appeared. Then more. 7 projects, 11, 19, 24. His confident posture disappeared. Lydia. What? I think this goes back years. She walked behind his chair. The earliest reference had been created almost 8 years earlier. Another 6 years ago. Another 4. Another only 3 months before the anniversary dinner. Russell's name had quietly existed inside the operational records of nearly every major Bennett development project. None of them had ever noticed. Lydia felt something unfamiliar. Not guilt, not yet. Confusion. She replayed dozens of conversations in her mind. How many times had Russell come home late saying only work took longer than expected? How many mornings had he left before sunrise because we're doing a systems review? She had never asked another question. She assumed his work involved maintenance schedules, building inspections, heating systems, electrical repairs. She had never imagined anything beyond that. Her phone remained silent. Russell still hadn't answered. At Hamilton and Rhodes, Russell finished reviewing the day's archive requests before walking into a secure conference room. 6 people already sat around the table. 2 senior attorneys, a cybersecurity specialist, the director of records, the firm's chief compliance officer. Daniel Rhodes entered last. He closed the heavy door. "Let's begin." No one mentioned Russell's marriage. The discussion focused entirely on procedure. The compliance officer projected a timeline onto a large monitor. Residential status update processed at 12:12 a.m. She clicked to the next slide. Continuity review initiated automatically. Another click. External dependency notifications transmitted beginning at 5:43 a.m. Another. Current status operating exactly as designed. Daniel looked around the room. Any irregularities? No. Any manual intervention? No. Any policy violations? No. Everything had happened automatically, exactly as federal guidelines required. Russell listened quietly. He recognized every procedure. He had helped design portions of the firm's physical continuity protocols years earlier, not because he possessed legal authority, because he understood operational reality. Computers could recover data. Someone still needed authorized people to retrieve original documents, verify chain of custody coordinate secure access, and maintain compliance under emergency conditions. Those responsibilities required trained personnel like Russell. The compliance officer turned toward him. "We've already received 18 inquiries this morning." Expected. Several callers are requesting exceptions. "There aren't any." She smiled faintly. "I know." Daniel folded his hands. "If additional requests arrive, we respond exactly as written." Russell nodded. Nothing changes. Meanwhile, 40 minutes away, panic continued spreading through Bennett Development. Another closing had been delayed. Then another. Claire entered carrying fresh printouts. "I'm sorry." Harold looked exhausted already. "What now?" "The River North acquisition." "What about it?" "The title company suspended document release." Harold closed his eyes briefly. "Reason?" "The same one." He almost laughed. "Compliance?" "Yes." Brandon slammed a folder shut. "This is impossible." "No," Harold answered quietly. "It isn't." Everyone looked toward him. He had spent decades in commercial real estate. Patterns mattered. Coincidences existed. But not like this. 4 unrelated banks, 3 law firms, 2 insurance carriers, multiple title companies, all reporting nearly identical delays. Independent organizations rarely failed in exactly the same way, unless they were connected by something larger. Harold stood. "Call Hamilton and Rhodes." Claire nodded immediately. Within minutes, she connected the firm's main reception desk. "This is Claire Donovan from Bennett Development Group. Good morning. We need to speak with someone regarding several compliance issues." "One moment." The call transferred. Another voice answered. "Office of Compliance." Claire explained the situation carefully. She listened, then covered the receiver. "They're asking which matter?" "All of them." She repeated Harold's answer. Another pause. Finally, the voice returned. "I'm sorry, but we're unable to discuss client operational procedures." Harold motioned for the phone. "This is Harold Bennett." "Good morning, Mr. Bennett." "I need answers." "I understand." "My projects are shutting down." "I understand." "So explain why." "I'm afraid I cannot." "Can I speak with Daniel Rhodes?" "Mr. Rhodes is unavailable." "What about Russell Hughes?" The silence lasted only 2 seconds, but Harold noticed it. "I'm sorry," the voice answered carefully. "We're unable to discuss employee matters." The line disconnected politely. Harold remained standing beside the conference table. Nobody spoke. Lydia looked toward her father. What did they say? They said nothing. Brandon frowned. So now what? Harold answered without hesitation. We find Russell. Lydia immediately picked up her phone again. Another call? Still voicemail? Another text. Russell, please answer. Dad needs to talk to you. Nothing. Susan finally broke the silence. Maybe we should go home. Lydia looked confused. Why? In case he returns. Harold shook his head. He won't. You don't know that. I know men. He paused. No, he corrected himself. I thought I knew Russell. That distinction mattered. For years, Harold believed Russell lacked ambition. Now he wasn't certain he had ever understood the man at all. Brandon suddenly stood. I'm going to Hamilton and Rhodes. Harold nodded. Go. If Russell's there, don't argue. I won't. Listen first. Brandon grabbed his jacket. Less than 30 minutes later, he entered the towering headquarters of Hamilton and Rhodes. The building felt different from Bennett Development. Quieter, more disciplined. Receptionists spoke softly. Employees moved quickly without unnecessary conversation. Brandon approached the reception desk. I'm looking for Russell Hughes. The receptionist smiled professionally. Do you have an appointment? No. I'm sorry. It's important. I'm sure it is. I just need 5 minutes. I'm afraid Mr. Hughes isn't available. You know who he is. Yes. That single word surprised Brandon. He had expected confusion. Instead, the receptionist answered immediately, as though Russell were someone well known inside the building. Brandon lowered his voice. I'm family. I'm sorry. Can you at least tell him I came? I can forward a message. Please. She typed briefly. What would you like the message to say? Brandon hesitated. Until that moment, he hadn't considered what he actually wanted to tell Russell. An apology, a demand, a request. He settled on honesty. Tell him. He stopped again. The receptionist waited patiently. Finally, Brandon spoke. Tell him we're trying to understand what's happening. She nodded. I'll pass along your message. Will he answer? I don't know. Brandon thanked her before leaving. As the revolving doors closed behind him, he looked back toward the reception desk. The staff treated Russell with quiet respect, not exaggerated admiration, not fear, respect. Brandon realized something uncomfortable. In 10 years, he had never once asked Russell what he actually did for a living. He had assumed. Every joke, every sarcastic comment, every dismissive smile. They had all been built on assumptions. Back upstairs, Russell received a notification from reception. Visitor Brandon Bennett. Message. We're trying to understand what's happening. Russell read the message once, then archived it. He neither smiled nor frowned. The narrator understood what Russell felt. Not satisfaction. Not revenge. Only sadness. Because if Brandon had asked that question even 1 day earlier, Russell would have answered what he legally could. Now the answers no longer belonged to him. They belonged to contracts, procedures, and a system that treated every person exactly the same. Late that afternoon, Daniel Rhodes stepped into Russell's office carrying another folder. The requests for exceptions have increased. Russell looked up. How many? 31. And the response? Daniel placed the folder on the desk. The same every time. Russell nodded. There had never been another response available. Daniel looked directly at him before speaking. I thought you should know. What? Daniel's expression remained calm. By tomorrow morning, they won't be looking for explanations anymore. He paused. They'll be looking for you. The emergency meeting began at 9 o'clock inside Conference Room 7 at Hamilton and Rhodes LLP. No one raised a voice. No one blamed another department. No one suggested bending a rule to satisfy an impatient client. The atmosphere remained calm because everyone in the room understood one principle that had guided the firm for more than a century. Compliance was not negotiable. Daniel Rhodes stood at the head of the table. To his right sat Karen Mitchell, the firm's chief compliance officer. Next to her was Michael Ortega, director of information security. Across from them sat two senior partners responsible for commercial real estate transactions. Russell occupied his usual seat near the end of the table. He never chose the chair closest to the front. He never tried to appear important. Karen activated the large monitor mounted on the wall. A dashboard filled the screen. 34 external inquiries, 12 delayed transactions, 7 requests for emergency exceptions, 4 demands for immediate partner review. She looked around this room. Every request concerns the same continuity chain. Daniel nodded. And the status? Fully compliant. Any system failures? None. Any unauthorized actions? None. She clicked to another page. A timeline appeared. 12:12 a.m. Residential status update verified. 12:14 a.m. Continuity protocol initiated. 5:43 a.m. External dependency notifications transmitted. 6:02 a.m. Certification review synchronized. 6:48 a.m. Partner alerts completed. Karen folded her hands. The system performed exactly as designed. One of the senior partners leaned forward. How many people outside this room actually understand what happened? Karen answered honestly. Very few. The partner sighed. They're assuming someone deliberately shut things down. No one did. Will they believe that? Daniel answered instead. They don't have to believe it. Everyone looked toward him. The documentation will speak for itself. Russell quietly watched the discussion. The narrator could see that he felt no satisfaction. If anything, he looked disappointed. Not because the Bennett family faced complications, because everything unfolding had become unavoidable. Years earlier, he had helped create these procedures precisely to prevent personal relationships from influencing legal responsibilities. Now, those same procedures affected his own life. The irony wasn't lost on him. Karen projected another document. This is the audit trail. Every action appeared in chronological order. Timestamps, employee identification numbers, digital verification, automatic system responses. Nothing had been entered manually. Nothing had been altered. Michael Ortega pointed toward one line. This notification generated automatically after Mr. Hughes updated his emergency residential status. One partner frowned. So, if someone else had been in Russell's position, the exact same process would have occurred. No exceptions. No. Daniel looked toward Russell. I know this is personal, Russell answered quietly. It doesn't change the policy. Daniel nodded. Exactly. Across town, Bennett development continued unraveling. Harold had moved from frustration into investigation. He no longer believed the delays were accidental. He wanted facts. The conference room now resembled a command center. Multiple attorneys occupied one side of the table. Financial advisors filled another. Phones rang almost continuously. Claire entered carrying another stack of printed emails. These just came in. Harold scanned the first page. Another postponed closing. The second, a lender requesting updated compliance verification. The third, an insurance carrier requiring certified operational confirmation before releasing coverage. Every document repeated the same language. Brandon rubbed his temples. I've never seen anything like this. Neither had Harold. He turned toward one of the outside attorneys. Explain it to me. The attorney opened a binder. As best we understand it, several independent organizations rely on the same certified operational chain. And when one element changes, every dependent organization is automatically notified. Harold crossed his arms. So this isn't one company causing problems. No, it's every company following the same compliance requirements. Correct. Harold looked toward Lydia. Did Russell ever mention certifications? She searched her memory. No. Not once? He talked about inspections. Building access? Equipment. But nothing like this. The narrator understood why. Russell had never lied. He simply answered the questions people actually asked. No one had ever asked what his certifications involved. No one had ever seemed interested. Lydia stared out the conference room window. She remembered one conversation from nearly 3 years earlier. Russell had returned home unusually late. She had been irritated. Why couldn't someone else handle it? Russell answered simply. Legally, no. She remembered rolling her eyes. I don't understand why they always need you. He smiled. Neither do I. At the time, she believed he was joking. Now she wondered whether he had answered more honestly than she realized. Her phone vibrated. For a split second, she hoped it was Russell. It wasn't. Another client asking why paperwork remained incomplete. She typed a quick apology before putting the phone away. For the first time since their anniversary, embarrassment replaced anger. Not because Russell had argued. He never had. Because she suddenly realized she knew almost nothing about the man she had married. At Hamilton and Rhodes, another inquiry arrived. Karen looked toward Russell. This one specifically requests your temporary authorization. Russell reached for the document. The request came from an outside lender. He read it carefully before sliding it back. Denied. One partner raised an eyebrow. You didn't hesitate. I couldn't. Karen nodded. The request violates federal continuity policy. Daniel added calmly, approval would expose every affected transaction to legal challenge. The partner leaned back. So even if Russell wanted to help, he legally cannot. That sentence settled heavily over the room. Russell wasn't refusing out of resentment. He wasn't punishing anyone. He simply lacked the authority to ignore procedures that applied equally to every client. Daniel stood. I expect additional pressure before the day ends. Michael smiled slightly. It already has. He held up his phone. I've received 3 messages asking whether this can be handled quietly. Daniel answered without looking. It cannot. Another partner laughed softly. People always believe rules become flexible once enough money is involved. Daniel shook his head. That's precisely why the rules exist. The meeting concluded shortly before noon. Russell returned to his office. He found 2 voicemail notifications waiting. The first came from Lydia. Russell, please call me. I don't understand what's happening. Her voice sounded tired. The second message came from Harold. Russell, if you receive this, I'd appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. No accusation. No demand. Only a request. Russell deleted neither message. He also returned neither call. Instead, he opened the next archive review scheduled for the afternoon. The narrator understood why. Russell believed that decisions made while emotions remained high rarely produced lasting solutions. He needed time, not to plan revenge, to think clearly. At Bennett Development, another attorney entered carrying a thick compliance manual. I think we've identified the issue. Everyone looked up immediately. What is it? Brandon asked. The attorney opened the manual to a bookmarked page. This operational chain requires an active certified continuity coordinator. Harold nodded impatiently. Go on. When a coordinator's legal residential status changes, the system requires revalidation before certain authorizations continue. Harold frowned. How long? It depends. On what? The certified individual. Silence filled the room. Lydia slowly lowered her eyes. So, she spoke carefully. They're waiting for Russell. The attorney corrected her. No, Everyone looked confused. They're waiting for the process connected to Mr. Hughes. There's an important difference. Harold understood immediately. The system wasn't demanding Russell obey anyone. The system wasn't asking him to return home. It wasn't rewarding him or punishing the Bennett family. It was simply following written procedures that had existed long before yesterday's anniversary dinner. Harold exhaled slowly. I spent 10 years believing that man had an ordinary job. No one answered. Because every person in the room had believed exactly the same thing. Late that afternoon, Daniel stopped outside Russell's office once more. The calls are becoming more respectful. Russell looked up from his desk. They've stopped demanding, for the most part. And started asking. Daniel smiled. Yes. Russell closed the file he had been reviewing. That's probably the first useful thing that's happened all day. Daniel studied him for a moment. I think tomorrow they'll ask something even more important. What? Daniel's expression became thoughtful. They'll stop asking what happened. He paused before continuing. They'll start asking who you really are. Russell left Hamilton and Rhodes shortly after 6 in the evening. The autumn air had grown colder than the night before. Downtown Chicago shimmered beneath thousands of office lights, while commuters hurried toward Union Station and the nearby subway entrances. The city remained busy, but Russell walked at the same measured pace he always had. He carried no briefcase full of secrets. No dramatic expression crossed his face. To everyone passing him on the sidewalk, he looked like another office employee heading home after an ordinary day. Only the narrator understood that almost nothing about the day had been ordinary. Instead of returning to the hotel immediately, Russell crossed the street toward a small neighborhood diner he had visited for years. The waitress recognized him. Evening, Russell. Good evening, Nancy. The turkey special. He smiled. You remember? You always ordered the same thing. She poured fresh coffee before walking away. Russell appreciated predictable places. No one there cared about titles. Nobody asked how much money he made. Nobody measured people by the cars they drove. He ate quietly while watching the evening news play silently on a television mounted above the counter. His phone vibrated. Lydia again. He looked at the screen for several seconds before placing the phone back into his pocket. Not because he hated her, because he wasn't yet ready to hear the fear that had replaced yesterday's confidence. Across town, that fear had continued growing. The Bennett family remained inside the conference room long after normal business hours. Coffee cups had been replaced 3 times. Legal pads covered the table. Every new answer seemed to create 2 new questions. Harold leaned back in his chair. We're missing something. One of the attorneys nodded. I agree. If Russell is so important, Harold paused. Why didn't we know? The attorney answered carefully. Because no one had reason to explain it. Brandon looked frustrated. I still don't understand why a facilities manager signs operational certifications. Another attorney opened a thick binder. The title doesn't necessarily reflect the responsibility. What do you mean? He turned several pages. Many organizations intentionally use understated public titles for personnel responsible for sensitive operational functions. Harold frowned. Security. Partly. Confidentiality. Also. So Russell's title may never have reflected his actual responsibilities. Correct. Silence settled over the room again. Lydia stared at the tabletop. For the first time in years, she remembered moments she had dismissed without thinking. One Thanksgiving dinner. Harold had laughed. So, Russell's still fixing air conditioners. Everyone smiled. Russell answered politely. Something like that. Lydia remembered laughing, too. She had never noticed that Russell never claimed Harold was correct. He simply allowed the misunderstanding to continue. Another memory surfaced. Christmas 5 years earlier. Emily had asked, Do you ever think about becoming a real executive? Russell smiled. I already have enough responsibility. Everyone assumed he meant maintaining office buildings. Perhaps he hadn't. Perhaps he couldn't explain. The realization left Lydia feeling unexpectedly ashamed. Meanwhile, Harold continued examining old project files. One folder contained a closing completed almost 7 years earlier. Another documented an industrial redevelopment outside Joliet. Another involved a hospital expansion. Every file contained familiar attorney names, bank names, insurance carriers, and Russell Hughes, always somewhere in the operational records, always invisible. Harold whispered almost to himself. He was standing in front of us all these years. Nobody answered. The narrator understood why Harold felt unsettled. He had built his career evaluating people within minutes, negotiating with investors, reading competitors, judging character. Yet he had completely misjudged the man who sat across his own dinner table for a decade. At Hamilton and Rhodes, Daniel Rhodes remained in his office reviewing the day's final reports. A soft knock interrupted him. Come in. Karen Mitchell entered carrying another folder. We've completed the internal audit. Daniel accepted it. Everything clean? Completely. She sat across from him. I've been thinking about Russell. Daniel looked up. So have I. Karen smiled faintly. I don't think I've ever heard him complain. Daniel closed the folder. In 14 years, not once. He accepted every overnight inspection, every emergency drill, every holiday rotation. Karen nodded. And he never asked for special treatment. Daniel leaned back. You know why I promoted him? I assumed it was because he was organized. Daniel shook his head. That helped. Then why? 8 years ago, one of our archive vaults flooded after a broken water line. Karen remembered the incident immediately. It happened on a Sunday. Daniel nodded. Russell arrived before anyone else. He protected every original document before the fire department finished pumping out the water. Karen smiled. I remember, Daniel continued. He never asked who would notice. He simply solved the problem. That quality had defined Russell's entire career. Solve the problem. Take no credit. Go home. The following morning, another flashback returned to Lydia unexpectedly. Their 5th wedding anniversary. Russell had canceled dinner at the last minute. I'm sorry. I have to go to work. Lydia had been furious. Can't someone else handle it? Russell answered quietly. No. She accused him of caring more about work than marriage. He apologized repeatedly. Now she wondered what emergency had required his presence. Perhaps it had never involved a broken air conditioner. Perhaps it had protected millions of dollars in legal records. Perhaps he simply couldn't tell her. The possibility hurt more than she expected. Around 9 o'clock that evening, Brandon walked into Harold's office carrying another box of archived files. I found something. Harold looked up. What? Old correspondence. He placed several folders across the desk. Most contained routine legal communication. Then one letter caught Harold's attention. Hamilton and Rhodes, LLP, Confidential Operational Continuity Review. Attached beneath the cover page appeared a handwritten note from nearly 6 years earlier. Reviewed and verified. R. Hughes. Harold read the initials twice, then a third time. I signed this contract. Brandon looked confused. So, I never noticed his initials. Neither did anyone else. Harold slowly closed the folder, because no one had been looking. At that exact moment, Russell entered his hotel room. He removed his jacket, placed tomorrow's shirt on a hanger, prepared another cup of tea using the small coffee maker. His evening routine remained almost identical to the night before. Until another notification appeared. One new voicemail from Harold. Russell listened. Russell, this is Harold. A long pause followed. I owe you something. Another pause. The truth is, his voice sounded older than Russell remembered. I don't think I ever tried to understand what you actually did. Silence. I'd appreciate the chance to correct that. The message ended. Russell set the phone on the bedside table. He closed his eyes for several seconds. The narrator knew something no one else could. Russell had never wanted admiration. He had never wanted the Bennett family to feel small. He had wanted something much simpler. Respect. Respect cost nothing. Yet somehow it had become the one thing never offered. He walked toward the window overlooking downtown Chicago. Far below, traffic continued flowing through the streets. Life moved forward, whether people were ready or not. Across the city, Harold sat alone in his office after everyone else had gone home. Boxes surrounded his desk, old contracts, closing binders, archived correspondence. For the first time in many years, he wasn't studying numbers. He was studying a man he had underestimated every single day. As he opened one final folder, a yellow sticky note slipped onto the desk. It had been attached years earlier by one of Hamilton and Rhodes' senior attorneys. The note contained only one handwritten sentence: coordinate directly with Russell Hughes. He always finds the solution before anyone else. Harold stared at the words in complete silence. Then he whispered to the empty office. My God. He leaned back slowly. We never knew who he really was. Russell woke before dawn once again. The city outside his hotel window remained wrapped in darkness, broken only by scattered office lights and the flashing beacons atop downtown skyscrapers. He stood quietly beside the glass holding a cup of black coffee while watching another day begin. His phone remained silent. No new voicemail, no missed calls. For the first time since the anniversary dinner, the morning felt almost peaceful. He appreciated that. Peace had become a rare companion during the final years of his marriage. After showering, Russell opened the leather portfolio he carried almost everywhere. Inside were neatly organized folders: personal insurance, property records, retirement statements, emergency contacts, medical directives, bank information. Every document rested inside clearly labeled sleeves. Nothing appeared rushed. Nothing suggested panic. The narrator understood something the Bennett family had not yet discovered. Russell had not prepared these files after Lydia threw him out. He had begun organizing them almost 2 years earlier, not because he expected divorce, because he believed every responsible adult should prepare for unexpected change. That philosophy guided every part of his life. Hope for stability. Prepare for uncertainty. He updated beneficiary information every January, reviewed insurance every spring, verified retirement accounts every autumn, backed up personal documents twice each year. No drama, only discipline. He closed the portfolio and placed it back inside his briefcase. At Hamilton and Rhodes, the workday began normally. Russell completed another routine inspection of the secure archive floor before joining Karen Mitchell for a scheduled quarterly records review. Neither person mentioned the Bennett family. Professional responsibilities always came first. Karen checked another storage room. Humidity: 42%. Temperature: 68. She nodded with satisfaction. Perfect. Russell recorded the numbers. Another ordinary task, the kind of responsibility nobody outside the department ever noticed. Yet those conditions protected irreplaceable legal records worth billions of dollars. Small details often carried enormous consequences. Across town, Lydia sat alone inside the kitchen of the home she had shared with Russell for nearly 10 years. The house felt strangely empty. She opened the refrigerator. Inside sat neatly labeled containers. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, prepared meals. Russell had cooked them the previous weekend. Without being asked, she opened another cabinet. Every household bill rested inside alphabetized folders: electricity, water, internet, insurance, property taxes. Each payment had been recorded by month. She frowned. Russell had always handled paperwork. She rarely looked at it. Now curiosity replaced habit. She carried the folders to the dining room table. Each file contained detailed records stretching back years. Nothing overdue, nothing forgotten. Receipts, confirmation numbers, renewal notices. Everything perfectly organized. Another realization settled over her. She had often joked that Russell was obsessed with filing cabinets. Now she understood why nothing in their lives had ever fallen apart. Someone had quietly held everything together. She continued searching. Inside another drawer, she found a small notebook. House maintenance schedule, air conditioner serviced, roof inspection completed, water heater replaced, smoke detectors tested, emergency generator maintenance, every task dated, every receipt attached. Russell had managed the home with the same careful attention he gave his professional responsibilities. Lydia lowered herself into a chair. When had she last thanked him? She honestly couldn't remember. Meanwhile, Harold sat inside his office reviewing financial statements. His chief financial officer entered, carrying several spreadsheets. "We've estimated the delays." Harold looked up. "How bad? If nothing changes today," he paused, "we'll postpone nearly $38 million in scheduled closings." Harold remained silent. "And next week? Potentially much more." Harold rubbed his forehead. Money wasn't the issue. Delays happened. Businesses recovered. What troubled him was uncertainty. He disliked not understanding the cause. His assistant knocked. "Mr. Bennett." "Yes." "Another courier delivery." "What now?" She handed him a thick envelope from Hamilton and Rhodes. Harold opened it immediately. Inside lay official correspondence. No accusations, no threats, no legal language suggesting punishment. Instead, the letter calmly explained that certain operational certifications remained under mandatory review according to established compliance procedures. Nothing in the document mentioned Russell personally. Nothing implied wrongdoing. The system simply required completion before dependent transactions could continue. Harold read every page twice. Then he leaned back slowly. The more information he received, the more obvious one fact became. Nobody had targeted Bennett Development. Nobody had sought revenge. Everything followed written procedure, exactly as Russell himself would have insisted. At Hamilton and Rhodes, Daniel Rhodes stopped outside Russell's office carrying another file. "You have a minute?" "Of course." Daniel entered. "I wanted your opinion." Russell accepted the folder. Inside sat proposed revisions to several continuity protocols. He reviewed each page carefully. After several minutes, he pointed toward one paragraph. "This creates unnecessary discretion?" Daniel smiled. "I thought you'd say that. If people can choose when procedures apply..." Russell looked up. Eventually they'll choose incorrectly." Daniel nodded. Exactly. That conversation revealed something Daniel had admired for years. Russell never built systems around personalities. He built them around consistency. People changed. Rules shouldn't. Daniel closed the folder. "I've also received another request." From Harold, "No." "Lydia." Russell remained quiet. "She asked whether I'd encourage you to call. And I told her that wasn't my place." Russell offered a small nod. "Thank you." Daniel stood. "For what it's worth." He hesitated. "I don't think she's beginning to understand your job." "I think she's beginning to understand me." There was an important difference. Back at the house, Lydia continued organizing paperwork. Another envelope caught her attention. Personal financial summary. She opened it carefully. Several pages listed household expenses, mortgage, utilities, insurance, home maintenance, unexpected repairs. A handwritten note appeared near the bottom. "Emergency reserve maintained through December." She frowned. "Emergency reserve." She walked toward the home office. Inside Russell's desk, she discovered another locked file box. The key remained taped beneath the drawer exactly where he always kept spare keys. She unlocked it. Inside rested neatly labeled folders: emergency savings, house repairs, medical reserve, education fund, unexpected expenses. Every account contained regular monthly deposits. Many came directly from Russell's salary. Lydia stared in disbelief. She had always assumed her income covered most of their lifestyle. The records told a different story. Russell hadn't competed with her earnings. He had quietly protected their future, without ever mentioning it. She picked up her phone. Another call, still voicemail. This time she didn't leave a message. She simply whispered after the call disconnected. "I'm sorry." No one heard. Across the city, Brandon visited one of the banks handling their delayed financing. The senior vice president greeted him politely. "I wish I had better news." "So do I." Brandon sat. "Can this be overridden?" The banker shook his head. "Not legally." "What if we guarantee the transaction personally?" "It doesn't matter." "What if Harold signs?" "It doesn't matter." Brandon leaned forward. "Then what does matter?" The banker folded his hands. "The compliance process. Nothing else." "Nothing else." Brandon drove back toward the office in complete silence. The city seemed different now. For years he believed influence solved every obstacle: a phone call, a relationship, a favor. Yet this situation ignored influence completely. The system treated the Bennett family exactly like everyone else. He found that strangely humbling. Late that afternoon, Russell finished another ordinary workday. He shut down his computer, locked confidential files, verified the archive logs one final time. Routine, always routine. As he reached the elevator, Karen caught up with him. "You heading out?" "Yes." She smiled. "I've worked with you for 9 years." Russell looked curious. "And I finally realized something." "What?" "You organize your personal life exactly the way you organize this building." Russell laughed quietly. "I suppose I do." Karen nodded. "It explains why you're never surprised by anything." Russell considered her observation, then answered softly, "You can't always control what happens." The elevator doors opened. "But you can prepare for it." Karen watched the doors close. Only then did she fully appreciate why Russell remained so calm, while everyone else around him seemed overwhelmed. Preparation had always been his quiet strength. And somewhere across Chicago, the Bennett family was only beginning to discover how much of their comfortable life had rested upon a man who prepared for everything, including the day he might have to walk away with nothing except his integrity. Friday morning arrived with gray clouds hanging over Chicago. A light rain coated the streets, turning the sidewalks glossy beneath the city lights that had not yet switched off. Commuters hurried beneath umbrellas focused on reaching offices before the weather worsened. Russell drove to work exactly as he always did. He stopped at the same coffee shop, ordered the same breakfast, thanked the same cashier. Routine steadied the mind. He had learned that lesson years earlier. When life became unpredictable, discipline became an anchor. At Bennett Development, however, there was no routine left. Harold arrived before sunrise to discover that nearly every department head was already waiting outside the executive conference room. No one had called the meeting. They had simply come. The accounting director spoke first. "We've got another issue." Harold nodded. "What is it?" "The escrow company postponed tomorrow's release." "The reason?" "The same. Compliance. Again." The operations director followed. "Our subcontractors want updated schedules." "Tell them we're working on it." "They're asking why." Harold sighed. "I don't have an answer." The room fell quiet. For the first time in decades, the founder of Bennett Development had admitted he did not know how to solve a business problem. That realization unsettled everyone. Brandon entered carrying a tablet. I've been digging through old project records. Harold looked up. Find anything useful? Maybe. He connected the tablet to the large display. A timeline appeared. Project after project stretched across the screen over the past 8 years. Every major commercial development, every large refinancing package, every acquisition. Brandon highlighted another column. Hamilton and Rhodes. Every project, another column. Operational continuity review, every project. Then the final column. Certified coordinator. Russell Hughes. Every project. Brandon slowly looked around the room. I don't think this is coincidence anymore. No, Harold answered quietly. It isn't. Their outside counsel adjusted his glasses. I've also contacted several colleagues. And they all describe Mr. Hughes the same way. Harold leaned forward. What did they say? The attorney read directly from his notes. Exceptionally reliable. Meticulous. Never misses deadlines. Known for preventing problems before they happen. Another note. Trusted by nearly every senior partner. Harold shook his head slowly. None of us knew. The attorney looked at him carefully. With respect, you never asked. Those words landed harder than anyone expected. Nobody argued. Because they were true. Across town, Russell walked through the secured archive level with a clipboard in one hand. A junior employee accompanied him. This room stores original partnership agreements. Russell nodded. And environmental controls, checked every 4 hours. The young employee frowned. Seems excessive. Russell smiled. It seems excessive until something goes wrong. They stopped beside a reinforced storage door. Russell entered a security code before continuing. Preparation is invisible. The younger employee looked confused. What do you mean? When preparation works, Russell unlocked the door. People assume nothing important happened. Inside, thousands of original legal documents rested inside climate-controlled shelving. The employee looked around in amazement. I didn't know this was here. Most people don't. Russell continued his inspection. If this room fails, he checked another sensor. Sorry, did the clients lose history? He verified another log. Businesses lose evidence. Another lock. Families lose records. He looked toward the young employee. Our job is making sure nobody ever notices we exist. The employee nodded slowly. For the first time, he understood why so many senior partners respected Russell. Not because he sought attention, because he quietly prevented disasters no one else ever saw. Meanwhile, Lydia sat alone in the empty dining room of her house. She had taken the day off for the first time in months. Not because she felt sick, because she couldn't concentrate. Russell's notebook remained open before her. She continued reading page after page. Home maintenance, emergency contacts, insurance renewals, future planning. Near the back, she found another section. Anniversary ideas. Her breathing stopped. Every anniversary for the next 5 years had been outlined. Trips, restaurants, small gifts, charity donations they might make together, ideas for renewing their vows. None of them had been crossed out. She turned another page. A handwritten sentence appeared. Ask Lydia where she'd like to travel after next year's project finishes. Tears filled her eyes before she realized they were coming. Russell had planned a future. She had ended it in a single evening. Her phone remained silent in her hands. She wanted to call him again. Instead, she closed her eyes. This time she knew words wouldn't be enough. At Bennett Development, another visitor arrived unexpectedly. Daniel Rhodes. Harold met him personally. I appreciate you coming. Daniel shook his hand politely. I only have a few minutes. They entered Harold's office together. Brandon and Lydia followed. Harold spoke first. We're trying to understand. I know. Can you explain Russell's role? Daniel answered immediately. No. Harold looked disappointed. Because you won't. Because I'm legally prohibited. Silence followed. Daniel continued. What I can tell you is this. Everyone listened carefully. Russell has served this firm with extraordinary integrity. He looked directly at Harold. For many years. Harold nodded slowly. I believe that now, Daniel continued. He has never used confidential information for personal benefit. He has never asked us for favors. He has never requested exceptions. Another pause. And he has certainly never asked us to inconvenience your family. Lydia lowered her eyes. Daniel wasn't accusing anyone. His calm honesty somehow felt worse. Harold finally asked the question that mattered. Can Russell fix this? Daniel considered his words. Not by himself. What does that mean? It means the procedures now underway belong to multiple organizations. So even if he wanted to, Daniel finished the sentence. He cannot simply decide they're finished. Harold nodded. I understand. For the first time, he truly did. This situation had grown larger than pride, larger than marriage, larger than one family. Professional systems existed precisely to prevent personal emotions from influencing important decisions. Russell had built his career protecting that principle. Daniel stood. I should return. Before leaving, he looked toward Lydia. I'll tell Russell one thing. She looked up hopefully. What? I'll tell him you've been trying to reach him, she whispered. Thank you. Daniel smiled gently. What he chooses to do with that information, he paused, will be entirely his decision. After Daniel left, nobody spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, Brandon broke the silence. I think we've been asking the wrong question. Harold looked toward him. What question should we ask? Brandon answered quietly. We keep asking how important Russell's job is. He looked toward Lydia. But maybe, he paused, we should have been asking how important Russell himself was. Those words echoed through the office. Across the city, Russell finished another ordinary afternoon. He approved routine maintenance requests, reviewed inspection reports, signed archive logs. Nothing dramatic happened. Yet as he prepared to leave for the evening, Karen approached with a thoughtful expression. I heard Daniel visited Bennett Development. Russell nodded once. He did. They're finally beginning to understand. Russell looked out the office window toward the rainy skyline. I hope they understand something more important. Karen waited. He spoke softly. A person's value shouldn't become visible only after they're gone. Karen said nothing, because there was nothing she could add. And somewhere across Chicago, the Bennett family was beginning to discover that the greatest loss they faced was never delayed business. It was realizing they had spent 10 years overlooking the quiet man who had been protecting far more than anyone had ever imagined. Saturday morning arrived with clear skies over Chicago. The rain had washed the city clean overnight, leaving the streets bright beneath the early sunlight. Office towers reflected blue across the Chicago River, while weekend traffic moved at a slower, quieter pace. For the first time in years, Russell had nowhere he needed to be before 8 o'clock. He brewed coffee inside the small hotel room and opened a paperback novel he had been carrying for months without finding time to finish. He managed exactly 3 pages before his phone vibrated. The screen displayed Daniel Rhodes. Russell answered. Good morning. Sorry to interrupt your weekend. Not at all. Daniel hesitated. They're here. Russell already knew who he meant. The Bennett family. All of them. Russell remained silent. They're asking whether you'll meet them. Another pause. What did you tell them? That it wasn't my decision. Russell looked out the hotel window. What are they asking for? Conversation. Nothing else? So far. Russell thanked him before ending the call. He didn't answer immediately because he needed to think. Not about revenge, about fairness. People deserved the opportunity to apologize. They did not automatically deserve forgiveness. Across town, Harold, Lydia, Brandon, Susan, and Emily sat together inside one of Hamilton and Rhodes' private conference rooms. No one complained about waiting. No one demanded special treatment. The change would have surprised anyone who had attended the anniversary dinner only 3 days earlier. Emily broke the silence first. "I owe him an apology." Susan nodded. "So do I." Harold looked toward the conference table. "I owe him much more than that." Lydia said nothing. She had spent most of the previous night reading through every notebook Russell had left behind. The more she learned, the more difficult it became to recognize the version of her husband she had created in her own mind, not because Russell had hidden himself, because she had stopped paying attention. Daniel entered quietly. "They'll let us know if Russell decides to come." Harold stood. "Thank you." Daniel looked at each member of the family before speaking. "I'd like to offer one piece of advice." Everyone listened. "When Russell arrives," he paused. "No, don't begin with business." Harold understood immediately. "We won't." Daniel nodded once before leaving the room. The advice lingered in the silence after the door closed. For years, every important conversation with Russell had eventually become about someone else's needs, someone else's schedule, someone else's expectations. Perhaps that had been the problem all along. Meanwhile, Russell drove without destination through downtown Chicago. He crossed the river, past Grant Park, continued along Lake Shore Drive. The lake stretched endlessly beside him, calm beneath the morning sun. He often drove there when decisions required clear thinking. Memories surfaced one after another. His first date with Lydia, their wedding, the first apartment they rented together, the excitement of buying their home, family holidays, laughing together over burned Thanksgiving rolls, late-night movies, long walks along Navy Pier. Not every memory hurt. Many remained beautiful. That truth mattered. A marriage could contain genuine happiness and still end painfully. After nearly an hour, Russell parked beside the lake and sat quietly. His phone remained in his hand. Another message from Daniel. "No pressure. Only information, they're still waiting." Russell smiled faintly. For once, someone was waiting for him instead of expecting him. Back at Hamilton and Rhodes, Harold walked toward the window overlooking the city. Brandon joined him. "Dad?" "What?" "I've been thinking." Harold nodded. "So have I." "When Russell used to come to family dinners," Brandon hesitated, "I don't think I ever asked him a single question about himself." Harold answered honestly. "Neither did I. We talked about my projects, my promotions, my investments." Harold looked down. "And I talked about mine." Brandon shook his head. "We expected him to listen. But we never listened." Harold closed his eyes briefly. That realization hurt more than the delayed business transactions, because it couldn't be blamed on misunderstanding, only neglect. Across the room, Susan quietly approached Lydia. "How are you holding up?" Lydia gave a tired smile. "I don't know." Susan gently squeezed her daughter's hand. "You love him." "I do." "Did you tell him?" Lydia looked away. "I assumed he knew." Susan's expression softened. Sometimes people need to hear it. Lydia thought about the last several years. Most conversations between them had revolved around schedules, groceries, bills, work, family obligations, repairs, appointments. When was the last time she had simply thanked him or told him she appreciated him? She couldn't remember. Russell finally turned his car toward downtown. Not because he had decided to reconcile, only because conversations deserved to happen face to face. Daniel met him privately before leading him toward the conference room. "You don't owe anyone anything." "I know." "If you want to leave after 5 minutes," Russell smiled. I know. Daniel opened the door. Every member of the Bennett family stood immediately. Nobody spoke. Russell looked exactly as he always had. Simple navy jacket, pressed shirt, calm expression. Nothing about him suggested triumph. Nothing suggested bitterness. Only quiet composure. Harold stepped forward first. Thank you for coming. Russell nodded politely. You wanted to talk? Harold motioned toward the conference table. If you're willing. Everyone sat. Another silence followed. Finally, Harold spoke. I've spent the last 3 days trying to understand your work, Russell answered calmly. I expected that. I also realized something else. Russell waited. I spent 10 years believing I understood you. He shook his head slowly. I didn't. Russell remained quiet. Harold continued. I judged your salary, your title, the clothes you wore, the car you drove. His voice grew heavier. I never judged your character. Because I never bothered to learn it. Russell looked at him for several seconds, then answered softly. No. You didn't. The honesty hurt, because it contained no anger, only truth. Brandon leaned forward next. I owe you an apology. Russell looked toward him. I made jokes. I treated you like you weren't successful. I assumed I was better than you. He lowered his eyes. I was wrong. Emily followed. So was I. Susan spoke quietly. I should have stopped those conversations years ago. Lydia still hadn't spoken. She couldn't. Every prepared sentence had disappeared. Russell finally looked toward her. She met his eyes for the first time since the anniversary dinner. I'm sorry. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. I know. The room fell silent again. Lydia struggled to continue. I've spent 3 days reading everything you left at the house. Russell looked surprised. My notebooks. She nodded. The maintenance schedules. The financial plans. The anniversary ideas. Her voice broke. You planned years ahead. Russell looked down. I always tried to. Lydia wiped away tears. And I kept telling people you cared more about work than about us. Russell answered carefully. I cared about protecting us. Another long silence settled over the room. Finally, Harold asked the question everyone had been avoiding. Russell, he chose each word deliberately. Is there anything we can do to make this right? Russell looked around the table. At Harold, Susan, Brandon, Emily, finally Lydia. His answer came without hesitation. You can stop measuring people by what you think they are worth. No one moved. He continued. I never wanted anyone to admire my job. His voice remained steady. I only wanted my family to respect me. The simplicity of that sentence struck every person in the room harder than any accusation ever could, because they all understood the painful truth. Respect had been the one gift they could have given freely. Instead, it had become the one thing they withheld for almost 10 years. The conference room remained silent long after Russell finished speaking. I never wanted anyone to admire my job. I only wanted my family to respect me. No one hurried to respond. There was nothing clever anyone could say that would erase 10 years of assumptions. Harold slowly folded his hands on the table. I've negotiated business deals for 40 years. He gave a tired smile. I always believed I could recognize character. He looked directly at Russell. I failed. Russell did not interrupt. Harold continued. I kept judging visible success. The house. The title. The income. The things everyone else could see. His voice softened. I completely overlooked the qualities that actually matter. Russell answered quietly. Many people do. There was no bitterness in his voice, only acceptance. That somehow made the confession more painful for everyone listening. Lydia finally found the courage to speak again. "I need you to know something." Russell looked toward her. "I never stopped loving you." He listened without expression. But somewhere along the way, she struggled to continue. "I stopped seeing you." Tears filled her eyes again. "I saw routines. I saw responsibilities. I saw someone who always handled everything." She shook her head. "I stopped seeing the person carrying all of it." Russell remained silent for several moments. Then he asked a simple question. "When did you last ask me how I was doing?" Lydia searched her memory. 1 month, 6 months, a year? She couldn't remember. Her silence became the answer. Russell nodded gently. "I couldn't remember either." No accusation followed, only honesty. Susan quietly wiped her eyes. She thought back to dozens of family dinners. Russell always arrived carrying something. Dessert, flowers, wine, groceries for the meal. He always helped Harold carry folding tables from the garage. He washed dishes before anyone asked. He fixed broken cabinet doors, changed light bulbs, helped neighbors move furniture. Every act had become so expected that eventually, nobody thanked him. His kindness had become invisible through repetition. Emily spoke next. "I owe you something besides an apology." Russell looked at her. "The jokes I made?" She lowered her eyes. "They weren't funny." "They were cruel," Russell answered calmly. "I know. I thought I was being entertaining. You were trying to fit in." Emily looked surprised. "You knew," Russell gave a faint smile. "I understood more than people realized." Brandon leaned back heavily. "Why didn't you ever defend yourself?" The question lingered in the room. Russell considered it carefully before answering. Would it have mattered? Nobody spoke. "If I had listed my responsibilities," he looked around the table, "would anyone have respected me because of who I was?" He paused. "Or because of what I did?" Again, silence. Russell continued. "I didn't want borrowed respect. I wanted genuine respect." The distinction settled over everyone. Harold slowly nodded. "I understand now." Russell met his eyes. "I believe you do." Daniel Rhodes quietly entered the room after knocking. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Harold stood. "Not at all." Daniel carried a thin folder. "I've just received confirmation." Russell immediately understood. "The review?" Daniel nodded. "The first phase has been completed." Harold looked hopeful. "What does that mean?" Daniel opened the folder. "The independent organizations have begun clearing operational certifications." "So the transactions?" "Some will begin moving again on Monday." A visible wave of relief crossed the room. Harold exhaled deeply. "Thank God." Daniel looked toward Russell, as expected. Russell simply nodded. Nothing about his expression changed. Harold noticed. "You knew this would happen." Russell answered. "Yes." "You weren't worried?" "I knew the procedures." Daniel smiled slightly. "Russell designed several of the review sequences years ago." Harold shook his head with quiet disbelief. "So, while we were panicking," Daniel finished the thought. He already understood the timeline. Another realization struck Harold. Throughout the entire crisis, Russell had never once exaggerated the situation. He had never threatened anyone, never hinted that he possessed extraordinary influence. He simply understood the system because he had helped build it. There was an enormous difference. Daniel closed the folder. "I'll leave you to finish." After he left, Harold turned back toward Russell. "I owe you another apology." Russell waited. "When this started..." Harold sighed. "I assumed you had somehow caused it." "I know. I actually wondered whether you were teaching us a lesson." Russell answered immediately. "I don't believe lessons should cost innocent people their livelihoods." Harold looked down. Of course you don't. That sentence perfectly described the man sitting across from him. Russell never confused justice with revenge. Employees depended on Bennett development. Families depended on paychecks. Contractors depended on projects. He would never intentionally damage those lives to settle a personal score. That realization humbled Harold more than anything else. Lydia slowly reached into her purse. I found something. She placed a folded piece of paper on the table. Russell recognized it immediately. His handwriting. My anniversary list. She nodded. I almost threw it away. Russell looked at the paper quietly. I know. I read every line. Her voice trembled. You had already made reservations? Russell smiled sadly. 3 months earlier. She unfolded the page. One sentence had been circled. Remember to thank Lydia for believing in me all these years. Lydia could barely speak. I didn't deserve that, Russell answered gently. I believed you did. The room grew completely silent. Harold stared at the note. For years he had believed Russell lacked ambition. Now he discovered a man who planned surprises months in advance, quietly saved for emergencies, protected everyone around him, and still remembered to write reminders to express gratitude. The contrast was overwhelming. Brandon finally broke the silence. I don't understand something. Russell looked toward him. You kept giving. You kept helping. You kept showing up. Even when we treated you badly. He hesitated. Why? Russell thought for several seconds. Then he answered. Because I loved Lydia. He looked toward her. And because I hoped one day her family would become mine? No one spoke. I thought if I remained patient, he continued quietly, eventually we'd understand each other. Harold closed his eyes. We never gave you that chance. Russell didn't argue. He didn't need to. The truth already belonged to everyone in the room. Several minutes passed without conversation. Finally, Harold stood. I'd like to ask one favor. Russell waited. It has nothing to do with business. Russell nodded. I'm listening. Harold walked around the conference table until he stood directly in front of Russell. Then, to everyone's surprise, he extended his hand, not as a businessman, not as the head of the family, simply as one man acknowledging another. I should have welcomed you into this family years ago. Russell looked at the offered hand. After a brief moment, he accepted it. The handshake was firm, respectful. Nothing more. Nothing less. Harold's voice grew quiet. Whether or not you ever become my son-in-law again? He swallowed. I hope you'll allow me to become a better man than the one who failed you. Russell released the handshake. People rarely changed overnight. He knew that. Real change required consistency. Time. Humility. Still, for the first time since the anniversary dinner, he believed Harold's words were sincere. Russell stood. I appreciate what everyone has said today. He looked around the room one last time. But apologies are beginnings. Everyone listened carefully. They aren't endings. Lydia nodded through tears. I understand. I need time, she answered before he continued. I know. Russell picked up his jacket. For the first time in years, no one tried to interrupt him. No one demanded another explanation. No one insisted he stay. They respected his decision. As he reached the door, Harold spoke one final sentence. Russell, he turned. Thank you. Not for saving projects, not for protecting contracts, not for understanding compliance. Simply thank you. Russell gave a small nod. You're welcome. Then he walked out of the conference room with the same quiet dignity he had carried throughout his entire marriage. Only now every person he left behind finally understood what they had failed to see for so many years. Respect had arrived too late to erase the past, but perhaps it had arrived early enough to change the future. Monday morning arrived with an unusual sense of calm. The city awakened to bright sunshine, and the weekend seemed to have washed away much of the tension that had settled over Chicago during the previous few days. Traffic resumed its familiar rhythm. Office buildings filled with employees carrying coffee cups and laptops. Life appeared ordinary again. For Russell, it truly was. He arrived at Hamilton and Rhodes 15 minutes early, greeted the security officers by name, and completed his usual walk through the operations floor before anyone requested his attention. Nothing about his routine changed. He checked environmental reports, verified overnight alarm logs, reviewed scheduled maintenance, approved access requests. Every action reflected the same discipline that had guided him for years. Karen Mitchell noticed him passing her office. "You look well," Russell smiled. "I slept better." "I imagine you did." She hesitated before asking another question. "Any regrets?" Russell considered it carefully. "No." "You don't regret meeting them?" "No." "You don't regret leaving?" A longer pause followed. "I regret that it became necessary." Karen nodded. She understood the difference. Across the city, Bennett Development experienced a very different Monday morning. For the first time since the compliance reviews had begun, notifications started arriving from banks, escrow companies, insurers, and legal departments. One by one, pending certifications cleared. Several delayed transactions resumed processing. Contractors received updated authorization notices. Financial institutions confirmed that the first stage of the operational review had been completed exactly as outlined in the published procedures. Nothing had been accelerated. Nothing had been delayed. Everything moved according to the timeline Russell had quietly expected from the beginning. Harold stood inside the executive conference room reading the latest updates. His chief financial officer entered with a relieved smile. "We're moving again." Harold nodded. "I know." "The lenders confirmed the first closings." "I've seen the reports." The CFO smiled. "I thought you'd be celebrating." Harold looked toward the city skyline outside his office window. "I am?" "But not for the reason you think." "What do you mean?" Harold folded the reports. "I'm relieved because our employees can move forward." He paused. "But I'm also relieved because I finally know Russell never caused any of this." The CFO looked surprised. "I never thought he did." Harold smiled sadly. "I wish I could say the same." That admission remained with him long after the conversation ended. Meanwhile, Daniel Rhodes gathered the firm's senior leadership for their regular Monday operations meeting. Unlike the emergency meetings of the previous week, today's agenda contained ordinary business. Client updates, technology improvements, facility planning, training schedules. As the meeting concluded, Daniel closed his notebook. "Before we finish, I'd like to recognize someone." Several partners looked around the room. Daniel continued. "The past week demonstrated the strength of procedures our operations department spent years developing." He looked toward Russell. "Many of those procedures exist because Russell Hughes insisted they be documented before anyone thought they would ever be needed." Several partners nodded. One senior attorney smiled. "I remember arguing with him." Laughter filled the room. Russell looked curious. "You wanted fewer backup steps." The attorney laughed again. "I absolutely did. And now, I'm grateful you ignored me." More laughter followed. Daniel stood. "Most people measure success by the crises they solve." He looked around the conference table. "I've always believed the greater achievement is preventing crises before they happen." Every eye turned toward Russell. The room applauded, not loudly, not dramatically, simply with genuine respect. Russell accepted it with his usual humility. "Thank you." He spoke only 2 words. That was enough. Later that afternoon, Harold arrived alone at Hamilton and Rhodes. He had not scheduled a meeting. He had not called ahead. Instead, he waited quietly in the reception area. When Daniel passed through the lobby, he noticed him immediately. "Harold, I hope I'm not interrupting." Daniel smiled. "Not at all. I'd like to leave something for Russell." Daniel nodded. "I can make sure he receives it." Harold handed him a small envelope. "No business. No requests. Just something I should have written years ago." Daniel accepted it. "I'll see that he gets it." Harold thanked him before quietly leaving the building. He never asked whether Russell would respond. For perhaps the first time in his life, he understood that some things could not be demanded. They could only be offered. Late that afternoon, Daniel placed the envelope on Russell's desk. "This is yours." Russell recognized Harold's handwriting. "Did he say anything?" "Very little." Russell waited until Daniel left before opening it. Inside rested a single handwritten letter. No legal language, no elaborate speech, only a few carefully written paragraphs. "Russell, I've spent my career believing that leadership meant having answers. Last week taught me that leadership begins with listening. I judged you without understanding you. I spoke about you without knowing you. I welcomed your work but failed to welcome you. You deserved better from me. Whether you ever forgive me or not, I wanted you to know that I finally understand the difference between influence and integrity. One earns attention. The other earns trust. You earned trust long before I recognized it. Thank you for treating my family with more grace than we treated you." Harold Bennett Russell read the letter twice. Then he folded it carefully and placed it inside his briefcase. Not because everything had been repaired, but because sincere apologies deserved to be preserved. That evening, Lydia remained alone in the house. She had spent the weekend removing every reminder of the bitterness that had accumulated over the years. Not photographs. Those remained. Instead, she removed something less visible: the habit of taking Russell for granted. She walked into the kitchen and stopped beside the refrigerator. The meal containers Russell had prepared the previous week were nearly gone. One remained. She heated it quietly. When she sat down to eat, she noticed another small label attached to the container. "Enjoy your Monday. Love, Russell." She covered her face with her hands. The note had been written before everything fell apart. Before the anniversary dinner. Before the arguments. Before she asked him to leave. He had expected her to eat lunch on Monday. He had planned for her comfort while she had unknowingly been planning his humiliation. The realization nearly broke her heart. Across town, Russell finished work and returned to the hotel. As he entered the lobby, the receptionist smiled. "Mr. Hughes." "Good evening. We have a package for you." Russell accepted a small box. There was no return address. Inside rested something unexpected: a framed photograph. It showed Russell and Lydia during their first anniversary. They were standing beside Lake Michigan, laughing at something outside the frame. A handwritten note rested behind the picture. "I found this while cleaning. It's my favorite picture of us, because neither of us knew someone was taking it. You looked genuinely happy. I hope someday, no matter what happens between us, you find that happiness again." Lydia Russell remained seated in the hotel lobby for several minutes, looking at the photograph. He remembered that day perfectly. The wind had nearly blown Lydia's hat into the lake. They had laughed until strangers around them started laughing too. It had been real. Their happiness had been real. The failure of their marriage did not erase that truth. Nor did those happy memories erase the pain that came later. Both could exist at the same time. The narrator understood what neither Russell nor Lydia fully realized yet. Respect had returned. Honesty had returned. Humility had returned. But trust moved differently. Trust was not rebuilt through speeches. It was rebuilt through consistent choices made over time. And for the first time in many years, everyone involved finally seemed willing to make those choices. Whether they would ultimately rebuild a marriage remained uncertain, but something equally important had already happened. Every person who had once measured Russell by his title now measured him by his character. And that was a kind of victory no promotion paycheck or public recognition could ever equal. 2 weeks passed. Life did not suddenly become perfect. That was never how real life worked. Instead, change arrived quietly, one ordinary day at a time. At Hamilton and Rhodes, the compliance reviews were now completely finished. Every delayed certification had moved through its required stages. Every lender, insurer, and outside organization resumed normal operations. The Bennett development projects continued without further interruption. Exactly as Russell had predicted from the beginning. When the final notice arrived, Daniel Rhodes stopped by Russell's office carrying nothing more than a single sheet of paper. "It's over." Russell read the confirmation. The review had officially concluded. No findings, no violations, no irregularities. Every procedure had functioned exactly as designed. Russell placed the paper in a file. "Good." Daniel laughed softly. "That's all?" Russell smiled. "What else should I say?" "I don't know." "I expected something more dramatic." Russell stood and walked toward the archive window overlooking the operations floor. "I've always believed the best compliance review is the one nobody remembers a year later." Daniel nodded. "You really are impossible to impress." Russell chuckled. "I've simply had enough excitement for 1 month." Daniel understood. Before leaving, he paused at the door. "By the way." "Yes." "I heard Bennett Development has changed several internal management policies." Russell looked curious. "Oh, mandatory leadership training, anonymous employee feedback, recognition programs, quarterly meetings with operations staff." Russell looked surprised. Daniel smiled. "Apparently, Harold Bennett has become interested in listening." Russell looked out the window once more. "I hope it lasts." "So do I." Across the city, those changes had indeed become reality. Harold stood before more than 200 employees gathered in the company's largest conference room. For years, he had opened these meetings by discussing revenue growth and upcoming projects. Today, he began differently. "I owe everyone here an apology." Employees exchanged uncertain glances. Harold continued. "I've spent many years celebrating visible achievements. Sales, contracts, expansion." He paused. "I haven't spent enough time recognizing the people whose work prevents problems before they ever appear." The room remained silent. "I've learned that some of the most valuable employees are also the quietest." He looked around carefully. "If you feel unseen," his voice softened. "That changes today." The applause that followed was genuine, not because every problem had disappeared, because employees recognized honesty when they heard it. Brandon had changed as well. He no longer parked in the executive spaces closest to the entrance. Instead, those spaces had been reassigned to employees working overnight maintenance and security shifts. When asked why, Brandon answered simply, "They're here before everyone else. They should walk the shortest distance." It wasn't a revolutionary decision, but it reflected a different way of thinking. Emily began volunteering with the company's Employee Appreciation Committee. Susan quietly started inviting neighbors for dinner instead of talking about social status. Small changes, ordinary changes, real changes. Meanwhile, Russell continued living in the hotel, not because he enjoyed it, because he had not yet decided what came next. He had rented a small apartment beginning the following month. Simple, comfortable, close to work. He had signed the lease without telling anyone. One evening, while packing several boxes inside the hotel room, his phone rang. Lydia. He looked at the screen for several moments, then answered. "Hello?" "Hi. Her voice sounded calmer than it had during previous conversations. Am I interrupting? No. I just wanted to ask something. I'm listening. There was a brief silence. Would you meet me? Russell waited. Not to discuss the marriage. Not to ask for anything. She hesitated. I'd just like to walk. He thought about the request. When? Tomorrow evening. At the lake. The same place where they had taken the anniversary photograph years earlier. Russell answered quietly. All right. The next evening they met just before sunset. Neither arrived carrying expectations, only honesty. For several minutes they walked without speaking. The waves rolled gently against the shoreline, while families watched children playing nearby. Life continued around them. Eventually Lydia spoke. I've been in counseling. Russell looked at her. For 2 weeks. He nodded. I think that's good. I needed someone to explain something. What? Why I kept measuring people by achievement. Russell listened. My counselor asked me where I learned that. She smiled sadly. I realized I'd been trying to earn approval my entire life. She looked toward the water. I started expecting everyone else to do the same. Russell understood. I should have recognized it sooner. No. She shook her head. That wasn't your responsibility. They continued walking. After several minutes, Russell spoke. I've learned something too. She looked at him. I spent years believing patience could fix everything. He smiled gently. It can't. No. Sometimes patience becomes permission. Lydia nodded slowly. I think you're right. Neither blamed the other. Both accepted responsibility for different mistakes. That conversation felt different from every argument they had ever shared. Nobody tried to win. Nobody interrupted. Nobody defended themselves. They simply listened. As the sun settled lower across Lake Michigan, Lydia reached into her coat pocket. I found this while cleaning. She handed him a small silver key. Russell recognized it immediately. The spare house key. I kept hoping you'd ask for it. He looked at the key, resting in his hand. I never did. I know. She took a slow breath. I shouldn't have waited. He slipped the key into his pocket, not because he intended to move back, because returning it felt like closing an unfinished chapter. They stopped near the same overlook where the photograph in the hotel package had been taken years earlier. Several tourists were taking pictures of the sunset. Neither Russell nor Lydia spoke for a while. Finally, Lydia smiled through quiet emotion. Do you remember what happened here? Russell laughed softly. Your hat almost blew into the lake. You chased it. And nearly fell into the water. She laughed for the first time in weeks. You looked ridiculous. So did you. For a brief moment, they were simply two people remembering happier days. No lawyers, no compliance reviews, no business crises, just memories. Lydia became serious again. I don't expect you to come home. Russell appreciated those words. I know. I don't expect forgiveness today. I know. I just wanted one thing. He waited. I wanted the last anniversary we shared to stop being remembered as the day I threw you out. She looked at him with quiet honesty. I'd rather remember it as the day we finally told each other the truth. Russell considered her words while watching the sun disappear behind the Chicago skyline. After a long silence, he answered, I think that's possible. She smiled through tears. Really? Yes. He looked towards the horizon. The anniversary didn't destroy our marriage. She waited. It revealed what had already been broken. Those words carried no anger, only understanding. Lydia nodded. I think you're right. As darkness slowly settled over the lake, they turned back toward the parking lot, not holding hands, not making promises, not pretending everything had been repaired, simply walking side by side with a level of honesty they had not shared in years. Sometimes healing did not begin with grand romantic gestures. Sometimes it began with two people finally seeing each other clearly. For Russell, that realization mattered more than any apology. For Lydia, it mattered more than any second chance. Because genuine change could never be built upon forgotten mistakes. It could only be built upon remembered truths. And for the first time since that painful anniversary dinner, both of them were finally standing on honest ground. Autumn arrived quietly in Chicago. The trees lining neighborhood streets slowly exchanged their summer green for shades of gold, crimson, and amber. Cool mornings replaced humid afternoons, and the city settled into the comfortable rhythm that always seemed to accompany the changing season. Nearly 3 months had passed since the anniversary dinner. Life looked different for everyone. Not because one dramatic event had solved every problem, because hundreds of small decisions had slowly reshaped old habits. Russell had moved into his new apartment. It overlooked a neighborhood park on the north side of the city. The apartment was modest, a comfortable living room, a small kitchen, 1 bedroom. Bookshelves lined one wall already filled with binders, novels, and photographs that had survived every difficult conversation. For the first time in years, every object inside the apartment had been placed exactly where he wanted it. There was peace in that simplicity. Saturday mornings became his favorite time of the week. He would walk to a nearby farmer's market, buy fresh vegetables, stop for coffee, then return home to prepare meals for the coming week. Some habits never changed. Preparation still gave him comfort. One Saturday afternoon, someone knocked at his apartment door. Russell opened it to find Harold Bennett standing outside holding 2 paper bags. "I hope I'm not intruding." Russell smiled politely. "You found the place?" Harold laughed. "Daniel refused to tell me." "I asked Lydia." Russell stepped aside. "You might as well come in." Harold entered slowly, looking around the apartment. "It's nice." "It suits me." Harold placed the bags on the kitchen counter. "I brought lunch." Russell raised an eyebrow. "You cooked?" Harold smiled sheepishly. "My wife supervised." Russell laughed. "I appreciate the honesty." They sat together at the small kitchen table. For several minutes, they simply ate. The silence felt comfortable rather than awkward. Eventually, Harold looked around the apartment once more. "You seem happy." Russell considered the question. "I'm peaceful." "Is there a difference?" "I think so." Harold nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about that." Russell waited. "I spent years chasing bigger contracts. Bigger offices. Bigger profits." He smiled faintly. "I forgot to ask whether I was actually enjoying my life." Russell took another sip of coffee. "What did you discover?" Harold answered honestly. "I wasn't." The admission carried no embarrassment, only maturity. Harold continued. "I've started leaving the office before dinner." Russell looked surprised. "So have I." "I've had breakfast with Susan every Saturday." "Without checking my phone," Russell smiled. "How's that going?" Harold laughed. "The first week I reached for my phone 6 times. And now, only once." Both men laughed. For the first time, they weren't speaking as adversaries or even as relatives connected through a broken marriage. They were simply 2 men comparing lessons learned later in life than either would have preferred. Before leaving, Harold stopped beside the apartment door. "I want you to know something." Russell looked at him. "I don't consider you family because you married Lydia." He paused. "I consider you family because of the kind of man you are." Russell was genuinely touched. "Thank you." Harold nodded once before quietly leaving. That afternoon, Russell stood at the apartment window watching Harold drive away. Respect had arrived slowly. Perhaps that was why it felt genuine. Meanwhile, Lydia's own life had changed in quieter ways. She continued attending counseling every week. She no longer measured success by titles or salaries. Instead, she found herself paying attention to ordinary moments. Co-workers who stayed late to help others. Neighbors who quietly shoveled snow from someone else's sidewalk. The receptionist who remembered everyone's birthday. She had begun noticing kindness instead of status. One evening, she volunteered at a neighborhood food pantry. The work was simple: sorting donations, packing grocery bags, helping elderly visitors carry food to their cars. As she finished stacking boxes, an older volunteer smiled. "You're new?" "I am." "What brought you here?" Lydia thought carefully before answering. "I spent too much of my life overlooking good people." The woman nodded warmly. "You're in the right place." Several weeks later, Lydia called Russell. "I have a question." "I'm listening." "Would you have dinner with me?" Russell smiled slightly. "As friends?" "As two people trying to continue being honest." He considered her request. "All right." They met at a small neighborhood restaurant neither of them had ever visited before. Neither wanted memories attached to the place. They wanted something entirely new. Conversation came naturally. They spoke about books, work, the changing weather, the park near Russell's apartment, the counseling sessions Lydia had continued attending. Not once did they argue. Not once did either person try to rewrite the past. Eventually, Lydia asked a question she had been carrying for months. "Are you happy?" Russell thought for several moments. "I think I'm becoming someone I forgot how to be." "What does that mean?" "Myself." She smiled sadly. "I remember that man." "I do too." There was no accusation in his voice, only quiet reflection. She nodded. "I hope I get to know him again," Russell answered honestly. "I hope so too." Notice what he had not said. He had not promised reconciliation. He had not rejected it either. He simply refused to make promises before they were ready. That alone showed how much both of them had grown. Several days later, Hamilton and Rhodes hosted its annual employee recognition dinner. Unlike previous years, Daniel Rhodes introduced a new award, the Quiet Leadership Award. The room applauded as Daniel stepped to the podium. Every organization depends upon people whose names rarely appear in headlines. He looked around the ballroom. They solve problems before anyone notices. They prevent mistakes nobody ever sees. They make everyone else's success possible. He smiled. This year's recipient probably wishes I would skip this speech. Laughter filled the room. Daniel continued. For 14 years, he has reminded all of us that integrity isn't measured by applause. It's measured by consistency. Russell Hughes. The ballroom rose in a standing ovation. Russell looked genuinely uncomfortable as he walked toward the stage. Daniel handed him the award. I know you don't enjoy attention. Russell smiled. I don't. But you've earned this. Russell accepted the small crystal plaque. When the applause finally quieted, Daniel gestured toward the microphone. Russell took a slow breath. I don't have much to say. Several people laughed knowingly. I've learned something recently. The room became quiet. Most people spend their lives trying to become important. He looked across the audience. I think it's better to become dependable. Another pause. Important people are remembered. He smiled gently. Dependable people are trusted. He looked toward his co-workers. Thank you for trusting me. Nothing more. The applause that followed lasted even longer than before. Among those standing quietly near the back of the ballroom were Harold, Susan, Brandon, Emily, and Lydia. None of them had been invited to the stage. None of them wanted attention. They simply watched as the man they had once underestimated received recognition from people who had understood his value all along. Lydia smiled through quiet tears. Months earlier, she had measured Russell by the title printed on his business card. Now she understood that no title could ever describe the character of the man standing before her. As the evening ended, Russell walked outside into the cool autumn air. Lydia joined him. Neither spoke immediately. Finally, she looked toward the city lights. I used to think success looked impressive. Russell smiled. And now, she looked toward the ballroom behind them. I think success looks peaceful. Russell looked at her for a long moment. I think you're right. Together they watched the lights of Chicago shimmer across the river, both understanding that the greatest transformation had never been about careers, money, or public recognition. It had been about learning to recognize the quiet worth of another human being before it was almost too late. 1 year later, the city looked almost exactly as it had on the morning everything changed. Chicago's skyline still reflected across the river. The train still rumbled through the loop before sunrise. Coffee shops still filled with commuters preparing for another workday. From a distance, nothing appeared different. But for the people whose lives had crossed on one painful anniversary, almost everything had changed. Russell stood inside Hamilton and Rhodes Operations Center, reviewing the morning reports. Environmental systems normal. Archive security verified. Scheduled maintenance complete. He signed the final inspection log before placing it neatly into its folder. Karen Mitchell appeared in the doorway carrying 2 cups of coffee. You've got an anniversary today. Russell smiled. I suppose I do. She handed him one of the cups. How does it feel? He thought for a moment. Different than I expected. Worse? No. Better. He smiled again. Wiser. Karen laughed. I'll accept that answer. She glanced toward the framed crystal award sitting quietly on the bookshelf. You know people still talk about your speech. Russell looked over his shoulder. I only spoke for about a minute. Exactly, Karen smiled. It was enough. After she left, Russell stood alone for another moment. 1 year earlier, he had walked out of his home carrying a single suitcase. He remembered the embarrassment, the confusion, the loneliness. At the time, he believed he had lost almost everything. Looking back now, he understood something entirely different. He had not lost himself. He had finally stopped abandoning himself. That realization had changed every part of his life. Across town, Bennett Development had also changed. Employee turnover had dropped significantly. Workplace satisfaction surveys had improved. Managers now attended quarterly leadership workshops focused on communication rather than authority. The company remained profitable, but Harold no longer described profits as their greatest achievement. During a meeting with new department supervisors, he stood before the room holding no financial reports. Instead, he held a simple notebook. I want to tell you a story. The managers listened. Last year, I nearly lost the opportunity to know one of the finest men I've ever met. He never mentioned Russell by name. He didn't need to. I judged someone by a title instead of character. I mistook quietness for weakness. I confused humility with lack of ambition. He looked around the room. If you leave this company remembering only one lesson. He closed the notebook. Remember that the people holding everything together are not always the loudest voices in the room. The managers applauded, not because it sounded inspirational, because everyone recognized it as genuine. Harold had become the kind of leader who admitted mistakes openly. That alone transformed the culture of the company. Brandon had changed as well. He spent one afternoon every month working alongside maintenance crews at construction sites, not for publicity. No photographers attended. No announcements appeared in company newsletters. He simply wanted to understand the work performed by people he had once overlooked. Emily had begun mentoring college students entering the workforce. Her first lesson never involved resumes or networking. Instead, she always asked the same question. How do you treat people who cannot improve your career? The answer she told them revealed far more about character than any professional achievement ever could. Susan volunteered regularly with community organizations and quietly organized meal deliveries for elderly neighbors. None of these changes erased the past, but they honored the lessons the past had taught. Late that afternoon, Russell left work earlier than usual. He drove toward Lake Michigan. Not because he felt sad, because he had accepted an invitation. Lydia was already waiting near the familiar overlook where they had walked together months earlier. When she saw him, she smiled. "You remembered." "I said I would." They had continued seeing each other throughout the past year. Slowly, carefully. Sometimes they shared dinner. Sometimes they simply walked. Sometimes weeks passed without meeting because both respected the other's independence. Neither had rushed to restore what had once existed. Instead, they had patiently built something entirely new: trust. One conversation at a time, one promise kept at a time, one ordinary day at a time. They began walking beside the lake. Lydia looked happier than she had a year earlier. Not because every regret had disappeared, because she no longer carried them alone. "I brought something." She reached into her bag. Russell recognized the object immediately. Their old wedding photograph. The frame had been repaired, the cracked corner replaced. "I almost threw this away last year." She handed it to him. "I'm glad you didn't." They stood quietly looking at the younger versions of themselves, smiling back from the photograph. "So much certainty," Lydia whispered. Russell nodded. "So little understanding." They laughed together, not at each other, at the innocence of believing love alone could sustain a marriage without daily respect. Lydia turned toward him. "I've wanted to ask you something." He waited patiently. "When people ask whether we're together..." She smiled nervously. "I never know what to say." Russell looked across the water before answering. "I think we're becoming partners again." She waited, but this time, he smiled gently. "We're choosing each other." Her eyes filled with quiet tears. "I like that answer." "So do I." They resumed walking. Neither needed dramatic declarations. Neither needed to relive old arguments. The silence between them no longer felt empty. It felt comfortable. As the sun slowly lowered toward the horizon, Harold and Susan approached from the nearby parking area carrying a picnic basket. Behind them came Brandon and Emily. The gathering had been planned weeks earlier, not to celebrate a wedding anniversary. That date no longer represented what it once had. Instead, they celebrated something different, a family willing to tell the truth. They spread blankets across the grass overlooking the lake. Everyone contributed something. Susan brought homemade pie. Harold grilled sandwiches. Emily unpacked fruit. Brandon carried folding chairs. Russell prepared coffee in a thermos exactly the way everyone liked it. Harold laughed. "You still remember." Russell smiled. "I usually do." As evening settled over Chicago, conversation flowed naturally. Nobody interrupted. Nobody competed. Nobody made jokes at another person's expense. For the first time, Russell wasn't treated as Lydia's quiet husband. He wasn't treated as the facilities manager. He wasn't treated as the man who understood compliance. He was simply Russell. And somehow that meant more than every title he had ever held. Later, after everyone had finished eating, Harold stood holding a paper cup of coffee. "I'd like to say one thing." The group became quiet. "A year ago today?" He looked toward Russell. "Our family made the worst mistake we'd ever made." He paused. "But that mistake forced us to confront truths we should have faced long before." He smiled warmly. "I can't change what happened. No one can. But I thank God that one good man responded to our failures with dignity instead of revenge." He raised his coffee cup. "To Russell." Everyone lifted their cups. Russell looked around at each face. Harold, Susan, Brandon, Emily, finally Lydia. He realized something that surprised even him. He no longer felt anger. Not because the past had disappeared, because forgiveness had quietly replaced the need to carry it forever. The narrator watched the family laughing together beneath the fading light of the Chicago skyline. This story had never been about becoming secretly powerful. It had never been about humiliating people who had shown disrespect. It had never been about proving that money wins. It was about something far simpler. The strongest people rarely announce their worth. They demonstrate it through consistency, through integrity, through quiet acts repeated over many years. Russell Hughes never became a different man after being thrown out on his anniversary. He remained exactly who he had always been. The only difference was that everyone else finally learned to see him clearly. And perhaps that is life's greatest lesson. Never wait until someone walks away to discover their value, because the most extraordinary people are often the ones who never ask to be noticed at all. If this story teaches us anything, it's that the true value of a person is rarely found in a job title, a paycheck, or the image they present to the world. Real character is revealed in the quiet sacrifices. No one applauds the promises kept when no one is watching, and the kindness shown without expecting recognition. Too often, we don't realize how much someone means to us until their absence exposes everything they were silently holding together. Respect should never be something we give only after success becomes visible. It should be something we offer because every person deserves to be seen, heard, and appreciated for who they are. Relationships don't fall apart in a single moment. They change through countless small choices, just as they can be rebuilt through countless acts of honesty, humility, and consistency. Before it's too late, take a moment to thank the people who quietly make your life better every day. Tell them they matter while they are still standing beside you, not after they've already walked away. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever underestimated someone or been underestimated yourself? Share your experience in the comments below because your story might encourage someone else. And if you enjoy meaningful stories about life, family, resilience, and second chances, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story.